Propose by midnight tonight or I'm leaving you for another man. My girlfriend texted. At 6:02 p.m. After 3 years together, she didn't know I had saved for 8 months and already bought a $4,200 ring. I didn't beg or argue. I drove to the jeweler and returned it. At 7:06 p.m. Then placed both receipts on her plate at dinner. My name's Ethan. I'm 29. I work in logistics management, nothing glamorous, but it's steady and I'm good at it. Sarah and I had been together for 3 years. We met at a birthday party, our mutual friend Dave's birthday, actually, and for the first year and a half, things were genuinely good. She was sharp, funny, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately figure out what was actually interesting about it. The shift was gradual. That's the thing about this kind of thing, it never announces itself. It just starts showing up in small comments. She'd mention a coworker's apartment, someone's promotion, what someone else's boyfriend had done for their anniversary. At first it felt like ambition, which I respected, but slowly I started to realize it wasn't really about ambition. It was about comparison, and I was always the thing being compared. About 18 months in, a guy named Mark started coming up. He worked at her agency, one of those guys who's always posting lifestyle content, always has a story about some restaurant or some trip, startup money, or at least that's how he carried himself. Sarah mentioned him casually at first, then more regularly. I noticed. I didn't say anything dramatic about it because I trusted her. What I didn't understand then was that she wasn't comparing me to Mark. She was measuring whether I was the kind of person who was going to do what Mark would do. The ring, I'd been saving for 8 months. A little from every paycheck, moved to a separate account I didn't touch. I went to Goldman & Sons on a Tuesday afternoon 3 months before all of this, a jewelry store about 12 minutes from my office. An older man named Robert helped me. I walked out with a small box in a paper bag and a $4,200 receipt, and my heart beating a little too fast. I kept it in my desk drawer for a month. Then I moved it to my jacket pocket 2 weeks before the anniversary because I'd decided, tonight, Le Jardin. The reservation I'd just made. That's the part she didn't know. After I read the text, I tried to call her. Voicemail. I sent a message, "Can we talk before tonight?" 4 minutes later she replied, "There's nothing to talk about. Yes or no?" I stared at that for a while. The jacket was still on the back of my chair. I kept thinking about what I'd been planning, the table, the restaurant, the way I'd thought about this evening for weeks. And then I thought about the text. Not just what it said, but the fact that she'd typed it out and sent it. Not called, not asked to talk. Just set a deadline and attached someone else's name to it as the consequence. At 6:45 I stood up. I put on the jacket. I drove to Goldman & Sons. Robert was behind the counter when I walked in. He recognized me. We'd spent close to an hour together 3 months ago, going back and forth on settings and sizing. He started to smile, and then he looked at my face and stopped. I told him I needed to return it. He didn't ask why. He pulled up the purchase record and walked me through the policy: 30-day return window, store credit, or 80% cash back. I'd known about the policy when I bought it. I'd asked because I was nervous about the timing, about proposing at the right moment. That question turned out to matter differently than I'd expected. I took the cash. Robert put the box back in the case. I folded the bills into my wallet and stood there for a second longer than I needed to. I don't know what I was waiting for. Maybe for it to feel like something. It wasn't like relief or certainty. It didn't feel like either of those things. It just felt like something that had to be done. I drove to Le Jardin, parked on the street outside, sat in the car with the engine off for a few minutes. Then I went inside, gave the hostess my name, and sat down at the table I'd reserved 3 weeks ago. I ordered water, and I waited. While I sat there alone, before she arrived, I had about 20 minutes with nothing to do but think. The trip upstate 3 months ago, maybe 4. She'd mentioned this place once, a town about 2 hours north, said she'd always wanted to go. I booked it as a surprise. We spent a weekend there, a rented cottage, good food. She said it was really nice. Then she looked at me over her wine and said, "But it's not a proposal, is it?" I laughed. I thought she was joking. Looking back, I don't think she was joking. There was a dinner about 6 weeks before the text. She came home from a work event, one of the agency things, and mentioned that Mark's girlfriend had just gotten engaged. "Insane ring," she said. Just those 2 words. Said it casually, the way you'd mention the weather. I heard what she meant. I just didn't pull the thread. And then there was the thing she said about a month before the text. We were talking about her career, and she said, "I know my worth. I'm not going to keep putting it on hold for something that might not happen." I thought she was talking about a promotion. I actually said something supportive about her standing up for herself at work. She nodded and didn't correct me. Sitting there at Le Jardin, I understood that I'd been in a relationship with a deadline I didn't know existed. She'd been running a clock, and the whole time I thought I was building towards something, she was already watching it expire. The other thing I understood, sitting there, this wasn't about commitment. I'd committed. I'd saved for 8 months. I'd bought the ring. I'd made the reservation. I wasn't the person who couldn't make things happen. I just wasn't moving on her schedule, and she'd decided her schedule was more important than asking me about mine. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it matters to what happened next. When I heard the door, I looked up. Sarah walked in wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, something she'd bought for tonight, clearly. She scanned the room, found me, and before she made eye contact, she looked at my jacket, specifically at the chest, the inner pocket. Then she looked at my face. She was smiling when she sat down. She ordered wine without looking at the menu. Then she leaned back in her chair, looked at me, and said, "So, are we doing this?" Her voice was light, warm, even. Like the text from 3 hours ago was already history, a little push she'd given herself that had worked out the way she'd planned. I told her I wanted to talk about what she sent me today. She tilted her head slightly. "I just needed you to know where I was at," she said. "I've been patient, Ethan. I know my worth. I'm not going to keep waiting for someone who doesn't know how to commit." She paused. "I didn't mean it to come out the way it did, but I needed you to take this seriously." She said Mark's name. Not as an apology, not with any guilt. Just, "Mark's been really supportive lately. I'm not going to pretend he isn't." Like that was a fair thing to say across an anniversary dinner table. I didn't react. I asked her, "What did you think I had in my pocket when I walked in tonight?" She smiled. She said, "I was hoping." I nodded. She took a sip of wine. She started talking about finally moving forward and starting the next chapter. She was building towards something in her head, a version of this evening where the difficult part was over and everything from here was celebration. She'd already decided how tonight was going to go. She just needed me to play my part. And I understood something watching her. She wasn't performing. She genuinely believed the ultimatum had worked. In her version of this story, she was the woman who'd finally stood up for herself, who knew her worth, who'd stopped waiting and made something happen. The text wasn't a threat in her mind. It was clarity. And clarity, in her version, was about to be rewarded. She said something about how she knew it had been a weird week, but she thought we both needed this. She was still smiling. She was looking at my jacket. I let her finish. Then, I put my phone on the table between us, face up, screen on. She looked at the phone. The text was open. Her words. Her number. 6:02 p.m. "Propose by midnight tonight, or I'm spending it with Mark." She read it. I watched her face. The smile didn't disappear all at once, it faded, like something draining slowly rather than switching off. She looked up at me, then back at the screen. "I didn't mean it like that," she said. I asked her what she meant. She said she'd been frustrated, that it had been a long week, that she just wanted me to take our future seriously. Her voice had dropped a little. She was still controlled, but her hands had moved off the table into her lap. I unlocked my email. I found the Goldman and Sons invoice, the purchase from 3 months ago, $4,200, ring size 6, white gold band, the receipt that had been sitting in my inbox since a Tuesday afternoon I'd spent nervous and hopeful. Below it was the return confirmation, timestamped that evening. 7:06 p.m., 80% cash refund. I turned the phone toward her again. She looked at it for longer this time. She looked at the purchase date. She looked at the return time. The restaurant had been quiet when I sat down. It still was, in the way that expensive places are quiet, a low hum of other people's conversations, nothing sharp. "You sold it," she said. It wasn't a question. I said yes. She said, "Because of one text." I told her it wasn't the text. The text was just the first honest thing she'd said to me in months. She was quiet for a moment. I could see her recalibrating. Then she said, "So this is your pride? You'd throw away 3 years over one bad moment." I didn't raise my voice. I told her I didn't think it was a bad moment. I thought it was an accurate one. She looked at me for a while after that. I could see the version of the evening she'd built in her head, the nice dress, the restaurant, the story she was going to tell collapsing against the Goldman receipt on the screen. She tried one more time. You're really going to let this end over a text message? Still framing it as my failure. Still putting the weight of it on me. I told her she'd asked me to make a decision by midnight. I made it at 7. The thing I want to be clear about. I wasn't cold. I wasn't enjoying it. I'd spent 8 months saving for a ring I believed in, for a relationship I thought was real, for a night I'd been planning since before she ever typed that text. The grief in that was real. But grief and doubt are two different things, and I didn't have any doubt left by then. I reached into my jacket pocket out of habit, that muscle memory from 2 weeks of checking for the box. My hand found nothing. I kept my face even. Then I stood up. I put cash on the table. Enough for the wine and a tip I didn't owe anyone any explanation for. I buttoned my jacket. Sarah said my name. I stopped. She asked, "Was it even going to be good enough for you?" I thought about answering. I actually considered it for a second whether there was something honest and useful I could say. There wasn't. Not anything that would change what had already happened, and not anything she was actually asking to hear. She wasn't asking a question. She was asking me to reconsider. I didn't answer. I walked toward the front of the restaurant. The waiter who'd brought my water was standing near the host stand. He didn't make eye contact. The restaurant was the same as it had been all evening: candles, low voices, the sound of silverware. Nothing had erupted. No scene. Just a table with a half-finished glass of wine and cash on the tablecloth, and a woman sitting alone at a reservation for 2. I pushed through the door, and the night air was cooler than I expected. I stood on the sidewalk for a second. The thing I noticed was that my jacket pocket was empty. I'd been checking that pocket every day for 2 weeks, adjusting the box, making sure it was still there, the way you'd keep touching something you were afraid of losing. Now I checked it, and there was nothing there. And that was the right answer. That was the thing that was supposed to be true now. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment with the door closed. No music, no phone. Just the kind of quiet that comes after something is finished. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't relieved, exactly. I was just still. The way you are when you've been bracing for something for a long time, and then the thing has happened and your body doesn't know yet what to do with all the tension it was holding. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. Not Sarah. Dave. I picked up. "Hey," Dave said. "Are you what happened tonight?" I asked him why. "Because Sarah's been texting the group chat for the last hour," he said. "She's saying you got cold feet at the restaurant. That you couldn't handle it." A pause. "She said you couldn't deal with a woman who knows her worth." There it was. She'd gotten there first. I'd been in a car for 10 minutes, and she'd already built a story and was distributing it to the people who knew both of us. I told Dave what happened. I didn't dramatize it. I just told him, the text at 6:02, the ring I'd had for 3 months, Goldman and Sons at 7:06, the restaurant. I told him I could send him 2 things if he wanted: the screenshot of her text and the Goldman receipts, purchase and return both. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "She sent that today? Like today? Today?" I said yes. Another pause. "And you had the ring?" I said yes. He said, "Man," and then didn't say anything else for a few seconds. That was enough. Dave has known me since before Sarah and I ever met. He's the reason we met, and he's not someone who says things to make you feel better. When he went quiet, it wasn't because he didn't believe me. It was because he was absorbing something that didn't fit inside a comfortable reaction. I sent him the screenshots that night. He didn't respond right away. I didn't need him to. Over the next couple of days, I got a few messages from people in the group. "Are you okay?" Sarah said type messages. I replied to a few of them. I kept it simple. "Here's what happened. Here are the receipts if you want them." I didn't ask anyone to pick sides. I wasn't trying to run a counter-campaign. I just gave people the accurate version of the story when they came to me with the inaccurate one. The noise died down. Not dramatically, nobody issued a verdict. Nobody publicly called Sarah out. But the version she'd been telling lost air. Dave stopped engaging with it. A few other people went quiet in a way that felt different from before. Her story needed people to believe that I'd panicked, that I'd gotten scared and backed out. It couldn't survive the timestamp on that text sitting next to a return receipt from the same evening. 2 days after Le Jardin, Sarah posted on Instagram a photo of herself in an apartment I didn't recognize: big windows, city skyline behind her, wine glass, soft lighting. The kind of photo that takes a minute to set up. The caption said, "Sometimes knowing your worth means choosing the life you actually want." No apologies. There were hashtags: authenticity, self, respect. I recognized the view. I'd seen it before in Mark's tagged posts. She'd been there before the photo went up, obviously, and probably before dinner, if I'm being honest about the math. 2 days after LaJardin wasn't a recovery timeline. It was barely a pause. Dave called me again the morning the post went up. She posted that 2 days later, he said. She was already there. I said I know. He was quiet for a second. Then, I showed a couple people the screenshots. Nobody's really arguing with her version anymore. He didn't say it like it was a win. He said it like something had settled, like a question that had been open for 2 days had just quietly been answered. I looked at the post one more time after we hung up. The caption, knowing your worth. The same phrase she'd used at dinner. The same phrase she'd been using for months, in different forms, every time she needed to justify the next thing she'd already decided to do. I'd heard it as ambition for a long time. Standing in my kitchen, looking at a photo in an apartment that wasn't mine and wasn't hers, I finally understood what it had always actually meant. It meant whatever she wanted was already justified before she wanted it. I closed the app. I made coffee. The weeks after were quieter than I expected. Sarah didn't reach out, or if she did, I didn't see it. I'm not going to pretend it was easy. 3 years is 3 years. There were nights I went over it. The trip upstate. The dinner where she mentioned the ring. The version of tonight I'd been imagining for 2 weeks. But here's the thing about the version I'd been imagining. It wasn't real. The woman I'd been building toward proposing to had been running a parallel track the whole time. That's not bitterness talking. That's just what the receipt showed. The mutual friend situation sorted itself out the way those things do, not with a formal declaration, just with gradual realignment. Some people stayed close to me. Some stayed close to her. Some faded from both of our lives. No one made a production of it. I didn't ask anyone to. I had money in my wallet I'd been putting aside for 8 months. I paid down a chunk of debt I'd been carrying. The logic of having a ring fund and then not having a ring had a practical upside I hadn't thought about. I signed up for a cooking class I'd been vaguely meaning to take for 2 years and had always pushed to the side because it felt like the wrong priority. Turns out it wasn't. I don't have a tidy way to explain what I learned about Sarah. I think she built a life around a very specific image of what things were supposed to look like, and when reality didn't match the image fast enough, she forced it. There's something human in that, even if I was on the wrong end of it. She wasn't a villain. She was someone who confused wanting a certain life with deserving it on her own timeline. What I know about myself, I was 29. I knew what I wasn't willing to accept. I knew what I'd been capable of giving. I'd saved for 8 months for someone I believed in. That wasn't wasted. That was evidence of something, just not the thing I thought it was evidence of. A few weeks after LaJardin, on a regular Wednesday morning, I put on my jacket to go to work. I reached into the inner pocket the way I'd been doing every day since I first put the box in there. Muscle memory. Checking. Empty. I stood there for a second with my hand in an empty pocket, and instead of the thing I'd been carrying the weight of what I was building toward, the question I was getting ready to ask, there was just nothing. Just my hand and the lining of my jacket. It was the right amount of nothing. Freedom doesn't always feel like winning, but it never felt like losing either.